a much higher bandwidth or higher range of frequency compared to amplitude modulation. So what is the range? It is said that this is having 200 kilohertz per channel bandwidth. Whereas in case of AM it was 10 kilohertz, but in case of FM it is 200 kilohertz. That means each band is given much more width so that more information can be packed inside every channel. So this is a very big advantage for frequency modulation. That is, frequency modulation, each channel width is almost 20 times greater than amplitude modulated waveform. So this is having 10 kilohertz channel width, this is having 200 kilohertz channel width. So FM bandwidth is 200 kilohertz, much wider bandwidth than FM, so FM carries more information. Point number 6, the FM carrier doesn't require much power. So that was the third disadvantage of amplitude modulation, that is, more power is required to transmit amplitude modulated waveform from the transmitter to the receiver, whereas FM transmitter requires less power. FM transmitter requires less transmission power. Like this. Okay, so these are 6 very big advantages of frequency modulation. And last one, that interference for 2 channels at same receiver, it is less in FM and it is more in AM. So point number 7, if we say point number 7, that is same channel, or you can say two other channel interference. This is less in FM and this is more in AM. So if there are 2 channels, as I said, amplitude modulation, 2 channels are having only 10 kilohertz width, so they are very close to each other. So at the receiver side there is a possibility that the information of 2 channels is getting overlapped. Okay, and then they create some kind of confusion, because whenever 2 channels information is getting overlapped, you are not finding each channel information separately. So sometimes it happens that 2 channel gets mixed up and we get some kind of a garbage signal at the output of the demodulator. But in case of FM, what we are finding is the channel width is more, it is 2 kilohertz, so each channel is separated by quite a big distance. So in that case, the channel getting mixed up, that chance is very less. So that's why it is said in the 7th advantage, there's the 2 other channel or 2 channel which are side by side. The 2 channel interference, the probability is far less in case of FM compared to AM. So these are the advantages of frequency modulated waveform. Now I will list down 3 or 4 disadvantages of FM, that is frequency modulated waveform. So it is now FM disadvantage, and obviously it can be compared with AM disadvantage. The first one is, this is number of sidebands in FM bandwidth. Number of sidebands in FM bandwidth is infinite. So we don't have the mathematical treatment at present, just you have to take it as it comes. AM is having only 2 sidebands. Okay, there is a lower sideband, upper sideband, and it's having only the carrier frequencies. Or actually there are different types of AM, but what we are finding is in case of frequency modulated waveform, the bandwidth is quite high and infinite number of sidebands are present. And we don't know how many sidebands has to be taken so that the whole signal can be reconstructed. So bandwidth of the FM waveform is very high because of infinite number of sidebands. So in that case, this leads to some power wastage. This leads to some kind of power wastage during transmission. So wide bandwidth means it leads to some kind of power wastage during transmission. Second thing, the complexity of the circuit. So it is complex modulator and demodulator circuit. That is a big disadvantage of FM modulator, demodulator. So this is costlier. This is costlier circuit. And number 4 is range of communication is less. Range of transmission is less. As it was explained, it is only line of sight communication. Okay. In case of AM, it was very long communication range, but in case of FM, we are finding it is only line of sight communication. So area of FM reception is much less than that of AM. Area coverage by frequency modulated waveform is much less. Okay. So these are the basics of analog modulation so far that we have discussed. We have discussed amplitude modulation, we have discussed frequency modulation, what are the techniques, what are the waveforms, and what are the advantage and disadvantage of amplitude modulated and frequency modulated waveforms. So this is completing actually the basics of analog modulation as per your syllabus. We will switch now to digital modulation and we will see what is the block diagram of digital communication system. So these were all analog communication discussed so far. We will now shift to the present trend, that is digital communication. So slowly all the analog communication things are being phased out and digital communication is coming and taking over all the analog communication part. Difference between analog communication and digital communication, what we are saying is in case of analog signal over longer distance it suffers from losses. So whenever the analog communication either AM or FM, it tries to cover a longer range. At that time the signal fading occurs. At the time the signal distortion occurs. So there are mainly 3 kinds of losses, which is called distortion, interference and security issue. So distortion, signal getting distorted, distortion, loss and security. So okay, together they are called as losses. So all these 3 things are high. All these 3 things are high in case of analog communication. So this is what we are finding. So in case of analog communication, these losses are very high. Losses are categorized in 3 parts: distortion, second one is interference, second one is interference, okay, distortion, interference and security. Security means tampering the amplitude or frequency of the modulated waveform. So these are together they are saying loss. So whenever it is amplitude modulated waveform, at that time these losses are quite high in case of amplitude modulated transmission, or frequency modulated transmission in case of analog transmission. What we are finding is hence the signals are digitized. If you are using digital communication, at that time the output is very accurate, the output is more clear and the output is more secured. So all these 3 things are taken care in the digital domain. Whenever we are using digital communication, at that time at the output the signal distortion is less because there is lot of checking happening between transmitter and receiver side, that whatever I am transmitting, whether that thing exactly is received or not. So there is some kind of encoder who is checking that. So distortion is less, interference is less because digital communication is occurring again in very high frequency and there are tests at every stage, there are checks at every stage so that we can check for interference, and obviously there are a lot of code and everything is included in the digital communication. So breaking into the security of digital communication is little difficult compared to the analog communication. Okay, so mainly these are the 3 points you have to remember. These things are these things are more in case of, these losses are more in case of analog communication and these losses are less in case of digital communication. So one very big question can be asked in the exam, that why digital? Why digital communication? So these are the 3 things you have to elaborate. Now we will see the basic block diagram of digital